I'm Louis Gordon. I'm professor of philosophy and Africana Studies here at the University of Connecticut at Storrs. In addition to that, I'm also the Europhilosophy Chair at Toulouse, France, and I am the Nelson Mandela Professor of International and Political Studies at Rhodes University in South Africa. Prior to coming to the University of Connecticut, I was at Temple University, where I created the Institute for the Study of Race and Social Thought, the Center for Afro-Jewish Studies, and I was the Laura Carnell Professor of Philosophy and also Professor of Jewish Studies and African American Studies. And before that, I was at Brown University, where I was the founding chair of Africana Studies. And so, as you could guess, I go to places according to my interests in the projects they are building. I'm seriously proud to be an African American. And I could tell you lots of reasons why, you know. I know there's a stereotype or this view that somehow black people get up in the morning and ask, oh Lord, why am I still black? But I actually don't get up with that thought. I am actually, for me to be connected to a history of people who, for the most part, was on the right side of a lot of important events in history. Black people, more perhaps than most people. I don't like to compare people, but the thing about black people is that black people hit the heart of a very profound element of the modern world, which is the modern world is built on enslavement while espousing freedom. Black people are a constant reminder that freedom is not being achieved. When you think about being a black person and you get up each day with freedom on your mind, to be black is to be connected to people who, with very modest means, fought against degradation, enslavement, fought against torture, fought against death. People who, for the most part, did not know what the future held, but knew they had to get up each day because tomorrow might be different than today. When I think about what it is to be a black person, I think about many achievements. I think about the blues. I think about jazz. I think about also just the basic fact that I love my mother. My mother is a black woman. When I think about what it is to be a black person, I think about the many connections to the fact that humanity began in Africa. I think about the fact that it's without doubt, the first human being who stood up and thought was brown or black. When I think about those things, but when I think about them, I don't think about it with a hubristic superiority to other groups. What I think about when I think about being a black person is that part of being black is to remember that you can't be black alone. That part of being black is to remember that other people are out there, that others matter. For instance, when you think about being white, the way the world constructs being white is as if you can forget everybody else, Just being white is cool. But you can't be black except understanding that, well, there are white people in the world. You can't be black without taking seriously there are brown people in the world. There are people of many hues. You can't be black without even thinking about among black people, there are black people from light to dark. So one of the things about being black that I consider to be very important and I take very seriously is that being black is to be relational. By that it means you understand you have a relationship with humanity, and when you remember that relationship with humanity, you get up every day with a sense of responsibility. Now, it's not that every black person shares that view. In fact, there are many black people who wish they could wash their blackness away, treating it as if it's dirt. But what they don't understand is that a fundamental part of loving yourself is in your relationship with loving others. If you're going to wash that away, that's a form of hating yourself, which means you will not have the positive in you to offer others. So for me, there is the reality that I was born in a world that was not, interestingly enough, only black. I am a black person. But, my father's mother's Chinese. And so I understand my relationship also to Chinese communities. My mother, part of my family is Tamil Indian. I understand that relationship, and a lot of my family, my mother included, were from Arab Jews and Sephardic Jews. And so to ask, when I get up thinking about being a black person, well, when I get up also thinking about being a Jewish person, I don't want to change being that part of what I am. That intimate knowledge is something that I see that is part of what enables me, at least, not only to live through the world, but also it profoundly has an impact on my conception of respect. So it's because I respect myself and I respect and love my mother and respect and love my children, all of whom are black people. It's precisely because of that relationship with the world and an understanding that black people are the convergence of so many, as Langston Hughes says, rivers. That is why, for me, Well, simply put, I just love being a black person.
Approach life.
There are profound differences between our generations. And I have to say, I really lament and I'm profoundly upset by a lot of what's been done to the generations that succeeded me. My childhood into adolescent years, into early adulthood, were from a period in this country's history, in the world's history, in which there was hope and promise. There was a belief that if you invest in institutions, they'll work. And in truth, a lot of institutions were working. Public education was such that, for instance, the elementary schools, the middle schools, the high schools I went to were open 7 days a week because they understood they were part of a community. They were not open simply for the students who were studying there, but for their parents to be able to have adult education. They were open so people can have community centers, sports, things going after school. And a lot of these things led to public universities such as this one, where people, first generation college graduates, could be made. In other words, it was a world that understood that in the world, the whole idea was that humanity mattered, and in every human being is a promise for the possibility of flourishing. Now, a terrible thing happened along the way, and that terrible thing was called the Reagan administration. Because the Reagan administration and the ideologues that followed it did not believe in public institutions. They believed that they should destroy these institutions because they believed that an educated population is a population of dissent. And they were right. The truth is, the more educated you are, the more you understand the world, the more you're informed, and the more you can be critical. And if you want a democracy in which you don't have a bunch of drones, a bunch of unanimistic individuals, a bunch of zombies walking around, you're going to need education. So that group waged war, particularly in public education. They also waged war on a variety of other aspects of society. If you have healthy people, for instance, if you have people who are going to have access to a lot of the resources beyond simply public education, good hospitals, all of these, you have a healthy population, you're going to raise the standards of living. And when the standards are raised, people want more. So one of the things, if you're going to fight back against that, which is interestingly enough an implication of what I consider to be part of the legacy of the struggle of black folk in the United States of America and a lot of the world, if you're going to cut back on that, what you have to do is begin to implement the forces of dependency, the forces of degradation, the forces of turning away from possibility, and that means destroying a lot of those institutions. So one of the things during that period was to create myths of everything from welfare queens to criminalization of black populations, all kinds of things like that, to rationalize withering away the resources through which you can have a humane society. That is the world, sadly, that your generation grew up in. And so your generation began to grow up in a world in which there are textbooks that, for instance, that misrepresent enslavement. Your generation has grown up in a world in which there's a greater interest in valorizing black youth, black adolescents, than dealing with the notion of black adults. In a world like that, you have a problem. Because you see, if you don't have a coherent conception of what it is to be an adult, then you will remain forever a child. And if you think about what slavery and you think about racism is about, those things were about having the conditions through which to call each of us boy or girl. But I'm no boy, I'm a man. And my children, when they grow up, my daughters are going to be women. My wife's a woman. My mother was a woman. My father was a man. And within that framework, what's very important is to be able to have some sense of what's called a telos, a purpose, an aim that will make a difference for each generation. Now, what is shocking, in fact, I consider it almost a human rights violation, is the deplorable level of misrepresentation of reality given to your generation. Your generation has been given the presupposition that the only thing really to be is to be a completely brought up into materialism, the market, and even the level of literacy is presumed is on the level of what is required to become, for instance, a pop star. But you see, that's also a stereotype of your generation, because I know within your generation, because I'm a professor, I've met many people who also transcend those stereotypes, those ways of being. Within your generation, there are people striving. Within your generation, there are people of hope. Within your generation, there are people who are saying, you know, a lot of people struggle to get me here, and I know there's a lot of pressure for me to achieve. But your generation also has something very beautiful, which is that your generation is able to ask the question in a very profound way, and it may sound very weird. You're able to say, what do I like? What do I enjoy? And now that may seem odd to you, but there was a presupposition in prior generations that what you thought, what you felt, what you could enjoy was irrelevant. You simply were either to serve, or if you're not serving, you were worthless. But the questions of worth transcend that. So one of the things that I think that's very crucial to bear in mind is that your generation actually faces different things than my generation. For instance, you're in a world in which the globe is smaller. Why do I say this? You're in a generation where just by getting on your computer and your cell phone, you're in touch with somebody in Japan, China, South Africa, or Brazil. Your generation is also a generation in a world of 7 billion people. So that means that the odds of your generation meeting somebody who's different from you, those odds are very high. That means the kind of challenges your generation faces is the challenge of what is in store for humanity to come. So there is a double move. One of them is that my generation faced a different set of problems, but I'm also very upset at some people in my generation, because some people in my generation frankly sold out. And what I mean by sold out is they went into a form of hedonistic me, a desire simply to get a narcissistic set of accolades that made them turn their back on something very important to your generation. And what that is that my generation is supposed to set a kind of standard that your generation could see and really imagine that you can not only achieve, but we should be encouraging you to outdo us. Well, we're talking about human communities. Any community you pick doesn't have to be African Americans. There's the good and the bad. And, one of the complicated things with how issues are talked about with African Americans is that African Americans are locked into a form of fallacy. The fallacy, of course, is this: one counts for all. So the problem is we have a subversion of the norm. In effect, then, when we have things that are messed up, people treat that as a rule. When the dominant group, say whites, have things that are messed up, those are treated as an exception. So the problem is, why is it you're normal if you fail and you're abnormal if you succeed? Whereas for whites, it doesn't matter how many white people fail. White people have a sense that white people can succeed. I bring this up because the problem with the way we deal with role models is we have role models constantly being brought in a web of misunderstanding and distorted discourses. For instance, Barack Obama is a role model. But Barack Obama is also a president. He's also a politician. And he's also a human being. He's not a god. I repeat, Barack Obama is not a god. Now, I say this because it means he's going to have flaws. So one of the things that we have to understand is when we think of a role model is not perfection. A role model is supposed to enable you to understand potential. And so if we think, for instance, of Marian Wright Edelman, she's an amazing role model. She created the Children's Defense Fund, but you don't hear much about her. If we think about the question of role models, we can also think, for instance, about the many generations of people. For instance, when there's a book I teach in one of my classes called The Maid's Narrative. And there's an extent to which a role model doesn't have to be someone all up high. A role model could also be someone who had the dignity and the will to make sure you are able to walk through the world with dignity. So for me, for instance, a role model was my mother. A role model was my stepfather. My stepfather only had a fifth grade education. He had very limited resources in the world, but he was absolutely devoted to his family, and he loved my mother. And there's an extent to which I remember distinctly to this day, because we were pretty poor. I remembered one day when I was playing, I'm a drummer, I was playing a gig, and he came to pick me up. And he had this card with the muffler going, it was battered up and so forth, and he was just finished as a mechanic, and he showed his hands are all dirty and all of that, and he showed up at the school to pick me up. And there are people who looked down at him, and I looked at them looking down at him, and I thought, if some of you are even quarter of the man he's dead. He was, you would be lucky in life. So I got my stuff in the car, and all I thought as we went home that day is how much I loved him. So our role models are people like that in our life. Now, role models are important, but role models are important if we can understand properly what they represent. I think role models, however, who represent bourgeoisification, superficiality, greed, the kind of people like that, I don't think they're role models, and I don't think we should give them that kind of a status. You know, I mean, but the long and short of it is just, in the end, we have to put role models into perspective. And you could think about this in terms of something you find in something I just mentioned when I brought up Judaism. Judaism has this concept called a mitzvah. And in it, there's this other concept, right? It's connected to the imago Dei, the image of God. And in Judaism, the image of God should not be about whether God is white, black, or any of that stuff. The image of God is supposed to be in your deeds. So a role model has to be a person whose actions represent the highest standards of what you would like to be as an ethical human being. Positive role models who are present today. Well, I look around in my colleagues in Africana Studies. Those are positive role models. I could be very specific about some people I really, really, really think highly of. I think Angela Davis is a great role model because Angela Davis represents courage. She represents love. She represents a commitment to freedom. She represents dignity. And she represents an understanding of what it is to understand one's education not as a little professional tool for a job, but one's education is cultivating a good relationship with humanity. I love Cornel West, but I know him personally. So it's a very complicated. A lot of people think of Cornel West, they like his celebrity superstardom, but I know the man personally. And there are aspects of Cornel that I know that, for me, is a really, for me it's good that there are people actually thinking about someone like him when they think about, because, you know, when you hang around Cornel, you want to do something, you know what I mean? You want to make a good role model makes you want to be a little better. You know, when I think about, there's a South African man I know by the name of Maboko More. This is a guy who could have left during apartheid and got a very easy life, but, you know, he went back and he was there struggling to make a better life for people during apartheid and afterwards. And he continues that struggle, and there's so many people who understand what he represents. That, for me, is an example of role models. They're very big, popular icons. We can't underestimate the value of the achievement of someone like Nelson Mandela or someone like Barack Obama or Michelle Obama. You know, and the reason I bring this up is there are a lot of reasons to be critical of Barack Obama. You know, the drone strikes, not good. Making the banks get richer, not good. Even nominating Lawrence Summers to head the federal, not good. So remember I said role models are not perfect. But one has to take very seriously that being the first in his position offers ample opportunities to screw up. There are many opportunities in which, the power of just seeing the first person to represent the world, right, from coming out of the black, and, you know, his mother was white, but he grew up in a world that the man knows he's black. But the power of his, not only the fact that he does it with dignity and with eloquence, but, you know, it's just great to know that an example of intelligence is represented in someone like him. You know, Nelson Mandela had a lot of screw-ups afterwards, but he did a lot of great things as well. The idea that privatization in South Africa has really led to a lot of growth in poverty in that country is connected to a lot of world forces that people have to grapple with. But I'm very proud to be the Nelson Mandela professor because the fact of the matter, he's also represented an effort of humanity to make ourselves rise a little higher. One of the things I love about Michelle Obama is not only the fact that she's articulate and she faces all kinds of horrible misrepresentations of who she is, but one of the things that, you know, as a role model is that one doesn't look at her as just a grinning on the side first lady. The fact when she gave that speech, for instance, to articulate the reasons for her husband's reelection is the moment I began to think of Michelle Obama in a radically different way. But there are many others, you know. I already mentioned the fact that there are some people out there, when I see them, those people who are doing their best to make things work in their communities. When I think about, for instance, the folks who are the blue-collar workers who are trying to make sure that their families can have some opportunities. For me, those are our role models of today. But also, you know, I think for black people, role models are not just black people. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you look at, for instance, some of the struggles that were going on in Latin America, when you think about some of the issues that are faced in Native America, when you think of people all the way through from the things that Geronimo Pratt stood for, or if you think through when you look in terms of some of the communities that are organizing in themselves in the Andes Mountains, or if you think through at least the efforts. You don't have to like his politics. You're just like there are people who don't like Mandela's politics. But the efforts that Chavez made to at least make there be a little more humane situation in Venezuela, that's something black folks should take very seriously. There are also other examples that we can think about, right? If you are, for instance, an individual who really takes seriously what it is to be fighting for freedom, for some black folks, the question of the spirituality of the Dalai Lama could be there. There are those who also could be critical of the Dalai Lama because of the complex politics and the way the United States relates to China. But nevertheless, that is there. And then when we think through some of the, the cases in terms of when we think of some issues in terms of some of the questions one may raise about the arts, right? So, for instance, when we think of someone like a Harry Belafonte, Harry Belafonte was a superstar singer and actor. But when he became the ambassador for dealing with questions of culture for the UN, he was not a lackey. He stood up, he spoke his mind, and he really represents what it is to fight the good fight with a lot of dignity. There are many, one of the things when you teach Afro-Am is you go through a lot of role models, to be frank with you, especially when I teach people who are living. And I could go on, but the thing is, we'll never get out of here. Yeah. But there are a whole lot of really good people that people could look through, examine their work, look at their biographies, read what they have to say. And, I'll stop there. Oh, man, it's more than one change. Well, one of the crucial things, first of all, I have to point out, I don't think there's black culture. I think there are African American cultures. There's a real big difference between some of the stuff in Mississippi and some of the stuff in the Midwest and the stuff in the West Coast, the North, right? But don't we have common bonds underneath? I don't think there's one culture. But I do think that when we think about ourselves in cultural terms, I don't think the real issue is changing our culture. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And what I say by that is because, you see, culture is produced by human beings. Mm-hmm. I think what we need to do is to change some of our commitments that we exemplify within the framework of our culture. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by some of these commitments would be, for instance, I think we need to get rid of the notion of black authenticity. If you think about what a lot of people think is what it is to be authentically black, it's just a bunch of stereotypes. So you have a situation where you could have young black people thinking they're more black if they walk around with sagging pants. You think a whole lot of young black people are thinking they could be more black if they're illiterate. You have a whole lot of young black people thinking they could be more black if they act gangster. You have a whole lot of black people thinking they could be more black if they're inarticulate. You have a whole lot of black people thinking they could be more black if they act as if they can be. There's a single narrative of a mythic movement of one group of people homogeneously through American history. The truth is black people are a flow and a constant meeting of different groups. Black people are, for instance, the influx of people from Grenada. Malcolm X's mother was from Grenada. Black people could be the influx of everything from Jamaicans to Puerto Ricans. Arthur Schomburg was a black man, but he's a Puerto Rican as well. When we think about black people, we can think about freedom fighters. If we think about someone like Frantz Fanon from Martinique. But also when we think about black people in the United States, I would love if we got rid of that negative authenticity model. And, it would be nice if we were to have something like, a good way to be black is to be high achieving. If people are like, I would love a day if people say, oh my God, these black people come in the room. How am I even going to pass this test? They're going to up the curve. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They're going to just change the game. I'd love it if it is a world where the very conception of what it is to be black is to not be nihilistic, as Cornel West would say, or my student Devon Johnson. He's written a dissertation on nihilism. I love if part of being black people is to be taking seriously what it is to be imaginative, and to be able to set serious conditions for the future. Now, I think a lot of that is in what it is to be black people, because, when I was talking about role models before, among the role models for me were not only my mother and my father and some of my great teachers, and I said they were not all black, I, the other day, bumped into a speaker here at UConn. She was coming from Stanford, who we ended up finding out that we had the same middle school teacher. It was this Italian man who was highly likely a gay man who just inspired us. And he was just such an amazing teacher that, I realize even when I teach philosophy to this day, I'm informed by what he had to say. Or it could be my middle school teacher, Miss Fearman, who gave me my copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Now, I bring this up because I would love if a lot of the ways in which we think about who we are as being connected to the question of flourishing, you see? And that requires something that's part of the kind of work that I see people like myself do. One of the things we do in our classes is to dispel the myth that to be black means to be underachieving. We need to re-articulate the understanding of being blackness to connect us to our foremothers and forefathers who fought so hard to give us a future. Those people were revolutionaries. And one of the problems with being a revolutionary is it's never good enough. So it's not really about us. They'll be proud of some of our achievements. And we have to admit, we have achieved quite a few things. And I don't mean simply the fact that there is a black person who's president of the United States. I'm talking about in areas such as physics. At this university, right, there's a professor, I think his name is Mantle. He's one of the great physicists around. When I think of string theory, I think of James Sylvester Gates. When I think of my former student, Stefan Alexander, he's now at Dartmouth. He's a professor of physics. We've done great things in the sciences. When I think of, Fatima Jackson, she's a medical anthropologist, a botanist, and she's a specialist in African American studies. Just those kind of achievements. When we think about, Frederick Douglass didn't even know that the person who developed plasma would be a black person. Well, even down to the basis of the brakes we use for trains. When we think about, McCoy, there's so many things achieved by black people, from the stoplight to we achieve a lot. So, they would be very proud of those achievements. There are also the things that we've done in music, whether it's from Charlie Parker to Coltrane, all the way through to some of, some people think I'm down on hip hop, but I'm actually not. I actually love hip hop. What I don't like is because I'm a jazz musician, what I don't like is the idea that you're more authentically black if you're doing hip hop. For me, that's a problem. The other problem is people are so defensive on hip hop that they don't really make a distinction between good hip hop and crap. Mm-hmm. They think if it's hip hop, it's good. But the truth is, there's a lot of crap. But there are now these moments where there are things that are absolutely brilliant. Mm-hmm. I think, for instance, some of those early recordings of Public Enemy, they would have been proud of. Mm-hmm. I think there are so many things that we can be proud of. But as revolutionaries, they say, don't sit your butt down and relax on your laurels. We have a lot to be ashamed of, too. Because there are a lot of us who sold out. there are a lot of us out there who, for the most part, think blackness is something to leave behind. And it doesn't mean that the world always has to be the way we think it is. We do want to change the world, but we have to bear in mind that, you know, there are so many things that we have to deal with that are connected to our political situation, that's connected to our socioeconomic situation. And there were resources, there were ways in which, in the past, black communities will come together for the betterment of the community. And I don't see that stuff that they would do the classic, you know, there's that moment where you can see it even in the videos, where, you know, the kind of ghost of the great black person comes and that person goes, you know what I'm talking about, the head nod. Well, you know, some of that stuff is there. When I was in college, for instance, I was in college with a lot of poor people. And I remember there were these moments where some of my friends, for instance, faced not being able to go to school another semester because she or he couldn't afford tuition. And you know what we did? We didn't say, yo, man, that's too bad, you know. We threw parties, we did fundraising, and we got our butt together and paid our fellow students tuition. We went and created collective book drives because there's certain courses people take. Some people are too poor to buy books. So we made sure we created a book sharing situation. In other words, there was a community sense that we are to take care of each other. And so that understanding, because Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, when you talk about people like that, we're talking about people who understood that we have to take care of each other. And that important element, that I think is one of the things missing right now, because there's a sense in which I'm on my own. It's all about me. There's a me, 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 me. But the truth is none of us can be anywhere if there weren't a we, an us, a community. So I think that it's a mixed bag. And even when we think about the future, I don't think, and I think that's actually right. You know, I think it's a myth that you have perfect people and that there'll be a time when somebody could say, you know, we've done it all, nothing more to do. I think it's a fundamental and important part of the human condition and also what it is to be striving for making the world better, always to appreciate achievements, but to be a little dissatisfied. Because that moment of dissatisfaction is to remind humanity that we can always go a step further.